get started. How's this working? Does anyone hear me better through this? No? All right. Can you hear me now? All right. My name is Dan Dunkle. I'm with the Camden Herald and the editor of the Camden Herald. We've organized this event here tonight with the candidates who are running for Camden Select Board. And I really appreciate all you guys turning out so that we can find out what they believe and where they stand on the issues. So it's kind of like a candidates debate, but it's kind of like just a candidates night, so it's somewhat informal, but I do have some rules. And first I'll just introduce everybody. So we have Raymond Andresen, we have Allison McKellar, who's the incumbent vice chair now, we have Chris Nolan, who did not direct Batman. We have Mary Beth Leanne Thomas, and we have Mark Radner, who is also a former incumbent. Leone, sorry. Leone Thomas. So I want to thank everybody here for coming. Here are going to be the ground rules. So all questions should go through the moderator, who is me. When you ask a question, please stand up and state your name for the record. Questions only, no speeches. Just ask a question. We don't need a lot of setup. We want to hear from the people who are running. Let's stick to the issues. No personal attacks. Keep it civil. Remember, we're all going to run into each other at the store, next week. So each candidate will have a chance to answer each of the questions given, and each candidate is going to be given 3 minutes to answer most of the questions. I'll be variously lenient and strict depending on how we do on time. They'll also have opening and closing statements where they can explain, whatever they want to. And also, please wait, till your turn for the candidates. So I don't want to get into any kind of back and forth. Like once you've asked your question, sit down and let them answer the question. Don't ask a bunch of follow-up questions. All questions go through the moderator. No applause or hooting or hollering, please. Let's just all listen quietly, and that way it'll be a safe space for them to state what their positions are.
Does that count for us as well?
Please, yes, please. And actually, let's start off with a round of applause. These people are volunteering their time. So we're going to start with Chris, and you are going to be able to give your opening comment. If you want this.
Thank you all for coming tonight. As Dan alluded to, I am Chris Nolan, and I know there's a lot of other more famous Chris Nolans than me. One is, yes, the director of Batman, and we do sometimes get phone calls asking about the end of another movie that he had done. I am not the Chris Nolan who's wealthy, who lives in Owl's Head and has a couple of boats and a couple of houses in Florida. If you search my name, you'll find him there. And I'm not Chris Nolan, the basketball star, if you couldn't tell already. No, I'm Chris Nolan, who moved to Camden in 1978, so I've only been here for about 45 years. And I'm not native, because before that I lived over in Bridgeton. But fortunately, a lot of people in town, if they don't know me, they know my family. And my family is my best marketing group that I have. They know me well. We've got my father, Jim Nolan, who is the state trooper who brought me to the area. I'm already not following your rules.
That's right.
And my wife, Heidi, and she's the one that says, Chris, I know you have a lot of ideas, and some of them are good. Heidi is the director of the Mid-Coast School of Technology. And these people, if you know them, you know a good amount about me. They're both nicer than me, and I'm sorry if my father has given you some blue light hospitality along the highways, but maybe he met you and also in a moment of need. I'm running, I'm a long-time resident. People asked me to run last year, and a friend of mine did the same thing in a neighboring town. And I thought, that's interesting, I can do that. I'm right for it. I am a former military officer, but I had a bad fall from about the height of Mount McGonagall. I won the race to the ground. But I landed softly at MBNA. At MBNA, I became a technology manager, and still today, I help other financial institutions stay safe with their use of technology. Why am I here? Why did I run? You'll hear themes about trust, regaining that trust in the government. That way we can get things done and still come together as a community. In talking with some people, I've learned the most, of course, from those who I didn't know, and they gave me some great ideas. But ultimately, we'll be looking to do the public's business in public. So thank you very much, and I hope something resonates with you tonight that we talk about.
Hello, I'm a little old-fashioned. I've got a speech written out instead of memorized or off the cuff. I'm Ray Andresen, and I'm running for the Select Board because I love Camden. I love the harbor, the mountains, the village shops, the history, the special events, and especially the friendliness of the people in this community. We have something special here, and I hope that I can help preserve it and improve it for future generations. That's why I'm running for your Select Board. My wife, Wendy, and I started coming here on vacation in 1986. Actually, she's sitting right here. She came here as a teenager from Kansas to study at the Hart Colony. And every time we arrived in Camden after 1986, she'd get out of the car, take a deep breath, and say, "Why is it we don't live here?" Well, finally in 2006, we moved here 2006, we retired and moved here permanently, and we have loved being here every day since. One of the many great things I discovered early on about Camden is that newcomers were welcomed and encouraged to participate in town affairs, be it at the annual town meeting, on town committees, as part of special civic groups, or at select board meetings. And since coming here, I have devoted my time and energy to serving the town of Camden and its citizens in a variety of ways. I am currently on the Budget Committee, the McGonagall River Citizens Advisory Committee, the Save the Dam Falls Committee, and the National Toboggan Championships Committee. That's the fun part. Previously, I was chairman of the Parks and Recreation Committee for 10 years, and have served on both the Tannery Work Group and the Ragged Mountain Four Seasons Study Group. In addition, I have been for a long time the president of Mary Spring Nature Center. In a quick advertising plug, we have our plant sale tomorrow and Saturday. Now I'm running for a seat on your select board. If elected, I will work hard to make our town government more responsive to you, the citizens of Camden. Here are a few quick ideas. I think we need more open government. Allow discussion at initial presentations of the public at the select board. Excuse me as I thumb through this.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. Allow all select board members to influence agenda items, provide follow-up items discussed at the last meeting, and make regular progress reports to the citizens so that issues are not ignored. Quite a few other ones on this list, but I'll finish up by, I hope to represent you, and I am very interested in hearing your questions and ideas about the issues that concern you.
Hello, I'm Mary Beth Leone Thomas, and I've been a resident of Camden for 40 years. And the reason I initially was interested in running for select board is I was on the budget committee, and I became very saddened that there was never any discussion about any of the budget issues. They were always just approved every single time, and I would be the only person who'd say, no. And it would almost got to be like, what is going on? That there's not a kind of dialogue or a spirit of, can we talk about what can we do? Because budget is power, and money is power, and that's where the things happen. And when you have engaged people talking about how to change budgets, how to do things more productively, that's where creative ideas come out, that's where there's kind of growth. So I experienced it as kind of stagnant and very disappointing that I wanted to do something about it. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I worked for many years in private practice in Camden doing individual and family therapy, and I also was on staff at Seaport Community Health Center. I was the director of behavioral health. I supervised 28 psychotherapists and would consult with them on the most challenging cases. And I'm a systems consultant in that I have special expertise in working with systems, understanding the covert, overt messages, how functional a system is, if it's not functional, if people don't feel safe to speak the truth, etc. So I think I bring a wealth of experience in terms of being a behavioral health person about just understanding how things operate. But again, my big impetus was I was concerned about taxes. I'm a retired person. I have a fixed income. And I thought, wait, why aren't we ever talking about this? My property taxes, I think, are too high. Can this be broached? And it didn't seem like people were on the same bus as with me on that. So I wanted to offer that, that perspective. I was married to Mac Thomas, who's now deceased, but who was very active in the Pathways Committee. And because Mac loved the Pathways Committee, and I saw what happened because of his efforts. He wrote grants, things happened, trails were built that we're still enjoying. And that's the beauty of working in a small town. We almost have a pure democracy. If you really get involved, you can make a difference. And it's very exciting because I saw him make a difference, make great relationships with people. So I just hope you consider my message. Thank you.
My name is Allison McKellar. I had something all written out, but I'm sort of inspired by the free dialogue here. This is actually kind of exciting. A lot of the time on the select board, we really don't get a chance, or I feel that we don't get a chance to talk about issues in depth and freely, and you know, you're so restricted oftentimes to just the specific agenda item that I've been really kind of craving this, just, you know, opportunities to get together, talk about things, and have, you know, broad, general topics. So it's exciting to me to hear that we've got a group of people here that everybody kind of wants to make that process work better, no matter what your grievances are or ideas for town government. I think most of us kind of feel like the public engagement part of things, the citizen input part is a little bit broken, and we can do better. A lot of people, most of us got involved by having some kind of an experience where we were frustrated with the way town government worked. I went to an annual town meeting one time because one of my friends on Facebook said, nobody ever comes to the annual town meeting and 60 people vote on the budget. You should go. And so I said, okay, I guess I should do that. And when I went there, they needed people on the budget committee. Leonard Luckner said, it looks like we need like the 20th person or something, and it looks like there's somebody here that could do that. You know, Allison could be on it. And that's kind of the way a lot of us have gotten like reeled into town government, is by getting put on a committee and then realizing like, whoa, like there are some things that could be done better. So that's what happened to me. What I really wanted was to be on the transfer station board. The only pathway to getting on the transfer station board, took me a long time to learn, was it's a 4-town transfer station. You have to be elected to one of the select boards of the 4 towns, and then you have to get your colleagues to choose you as the representative. So after many years, I achieved that goal. All I ever really wanted was to loosen up the no salvaging policy. I'm a big recycling person. It kills me that we're throwing away things in the landfill that could be used by somebody. So that's sort of like my big personal passion item. I have not succeeded in fully reversing the no salvaging policy. So that's my, my big thing that I want to do. In the process, though, I have become treasurer of the dump. So I've learned lots about the numbers behind it, and I've learned a lot from people and I've changed my mind on a lot of things. And I think sometimes people quit really at the point where they've learned enough to be effective. And so I think it's important that there's a mix of people on the board that are new and old, and I never thought I'd be calling myself one of the old people, but here I am.
Okay, you started? Okay. We're all standing up because Chris wanted to stand up, so I'm not used to this. I'm by nature a shy person. This is one of the hardest things to do. The thing I like about the select board is I like doing the job. I'm not necessarily crazy about running for the job. It's hard, they're two different jobs. But I love doing public service work. I lived in Los Angeles for lots of years. I spent 32 years working as a reserve deputy at the LA County Sheriff's Department. Most of those years were running a mountain search and rescue team. I live here now. I'm a founding member of Coastal Mountain Search and Rescue. And so we go out and we save people. I like doing public service. Right after we moved here in 2007, although we started vacationing here in 1981, my wife and I got married here. We flew from Los Angeles and got married at the yacht club and flew back to LA. In 2007, we moved here. Pretty soon afterwards, I had worked in the music business, and my wife noticed in the Camden Herald, oh, there's a note, they need somebody for the committee for the Camden Opera House. And I said, well, I've been in the music business, I'll go sign up for that. So I signed up for that. A few years later, I was the committee chair, made presentations to the budget committee, joined the energy committee, and I started going to select board meetings, and I went for 2 years, just almost to every meeting, to see how the town worked, to see what happened. And one thing I can tell you is, no matter what you think of a job, until you do the job, it's very different. The select board is very different than it seems. One of the things that was frustrating is, no matter how many times we say it, the select board basically does never take the vote away from the public. What we do is, no big town decision can be made without the town voting on it. There's been a question about, should we go to a city council kind of government? And I don't want to do that. I like that the town gets to vote on all the issues and the people make the decision. All we do is help get that in front of them and hopefully educate them. I'm running for the board again. I spent 6 years on the board. I spent the last year watching it and seeing, what am I missing? And a lot of times I think you don't see the forest for the trees sometimes when you're so close to it. One of the things I agree with Ray about is the communication and the ability of the public to talk to the board and back and forth. I think that's a problem, and it has been a big problem. And I've been sort of upset about that and said, that's not the way it should be. How much time do I have left? 19 seconds.
Okay.
I figure we'll get into the meat of all these things. I love doing volunteer work. I still do it. I love the job. And last thing, when I first started the job and Pat Finnegan was the town manager, she said, what's on your agenda? And I said, I don't have an agenda. There's not one thing I want to do. I want to do the best job for the citizens of Camden.
Okay. So one of the things when I was researching the whole thing with the budget, after the school budget, the most expensive line item we have is law enforcement. So I started trying to think about what would be a positive way to save money on law enforcement. And I quickly found out about public safety officers, where people are duly trained in law enforcement and fire safety. And you have very skilled professionals who do both, so they have a decent salary. But generally across the board, it saves towns significant money, especially small towns, where when our police chief came, and he told us that Camden, we're fortunate, he said Camden basically almost has a 0% crime rate. How could we get the biggest bang for the buck? And it was through public safety officers. And the model, I talked to Sunnyvale, California, has been doing it for 70 years. They were one of the first ones in the country. And I've had dialogue with the chief and the mayor. And they talked about how it changes the whole climate Some people might have an issue with police officers, but everyone loves firemen. And somehow when you combine them, you get a generally more positive, the community responds more positively. And I was very interested that more women are interested in becoming public safety officers with the dual kind of responsibility. So there are a lot of things that were very compelling about having a public safety office, and it would take like 15 years to transition to this model. I'm very realistic about this. This isn't a big, huge change, but if you just make it the norm that we're going to expect folks to have both, then people just do that, and it's not that complicated, and it's happening very successfully. And today in Rotary, a fireman came and spoke to us and said and he was giving us a lecture on Narcan. And he said, and he also knows CPR, that past week, there was a guy who overdosed. The police were there first in Camden, and when you overdose, it's respiratory failure. You die from that. And nobody on those officers did not know how to do CPR. First responders, in my book, should know how to do CPR. And they came and they resuscitated the person, and the person was okay. So I just think it's a practical idea.
All I really want to say about what Mary Beth proposed is that these are the type of ideas that the citizens of this town have to come up with, and she's very realistic. It will take many years to transition to that, but it's a great idea. Excuse me, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a great idea. It's something that I think we can look forward to as a town implementing, or possibly at least need to investigate and see if it's possible for us to do. But it sounds like it's a very good idea.
System for this. Teamwork test here. Well, one of the things that I've learned is that I don't know everything, and that I can't always figure things out just by doing a little bit of searching on the internet. I had a lot of opinions at first about the police department, the fire department. I was one of those people on the budget committee that town staff probably really dreaded and were annoyed by, because I would say things that made a lot of sense, and people would write me and they would say, this is the problem with the fire department, this is the problem with the police department. I'd say, oh wow, that makes a lot of sense. I should be the one to say that. And some of those things have, I still believe, and some of them I've also realized that there's a reason why we hire competent professionals, and that I try to shy away a little bit from, especially in these areas where I know I don't have a lot of knowledge, mandating something that would happen. I do think there have been a lot of conversations amongst the police chiefs and fire chiefs about better ways of doing things. We have an EMS committee. I'm looking at Stephanie thinking, maybe Stephanie could answer this question for me. But I think this is one of the areas where I am just not as knowledgeable as my colleagues, and part of the learning experience has been kind of learning when to interject with my ideas and when to sit back and listen to people who know more. So I would certainly support all kinds of discussions and look for ways to be helpful if I could.
Thank you for the question. Obviously, public safety is important, and I think it is kind of an interesting idea. As far as my background goes, you know that my father, Jim, was a Maine State Trooper. His father was a New Jersey State Trooper. He rode a motorcycle as a state trooper for a short time in the 80s. My grandfather did as well in New Jersey. I also have a criminal justice degree. My second son, Aaron, was a police officer for a while in a small town. And there are a lot of challenges. And I think when any police officer graduates, used to be that the colonel would say, as a police officer, you have a front seat ticket to the world. And as a family member, you're at least sitting in the second seat. And certainly something I learned as a youngster, if it looks like orange juice in the refrigerator, it might taste funny if you drink it. But it certainly used to be, when my father started the State Police Academy, that there was always a lot of people who would apply. And it's true, there are fewer people who apply for those jobs for any number of reasons. And Randy also struggles with trying to get really good applicants. Brandon, Chief, whatever, Gagney, he and I were in Boy Scouts together, so he's still Randy to me. It's just like my roommate in college is a priest, he's still Rick. But the important thing is, that's a great idea. So what? I've got this criminal justice background running around in my family. It doesn't matter that I do if I don't also have an open mind. That is kind of an interesting idea. It's something that should be tossed around. Camden is full of smart people, educated people. You don't know where an idea may come from, and sometimes it's the right thing to think outside the box, which to me, yeah, this is pretty far outside the box, this is kind of new. But it's also an interesting concept, an idea, given the struggles for hiring good people. So thank you for the question, it's an interesting idea. We'll pass it on, thank you.
I'm gonna get my exercise standing up and down today, this is good. Every time I hear an interesting idea, and this is what I used to do on the select board, I think that's a good idea, let me research it. I did try to never make a decision on the select board without researching the question. Now I have a background, 32 years working with the LA County Sheriff's Department, so I understand some of the challenges of that. I worked with, when I was there, worked with friends who are both in LA City Fire and LA County Fire. So the first thing I did is I Googled to find out how is this happening. And Mary's right, Sunnyvale does have that program. They started it in 1950, and they're the only department I could find that has a current working program like that. I talked to both Chief Gagney and to Chief Farley about it, and Chief Gagney said, if there's a department about it, I'd like to find out about it, I'd like to learn about it. He's always interested in everything that happens. Chief Farley thought, well, there's a town in Waterville Valley, he said, not Owlshead, who was it? Old Orchard Beach tried it in the 80s and it failed miserably. Those are his words. And he said, I think there's Waterville Valley in New Hampshire is doing it. They're a small town, so I checked that out. They have 500 people. And what they're doing is not combining fire and police, they're combining police and other people, the fire being trained as emergency medical people, paramedic people as well. And that's the same thing that Camden started in the last couple of years. We do have police people that are trained in Narcon and carry it. We have a whole bunch of them that have gone to a first aid EMT. We've just started, our fire department now has a bunch of EMTs and now an unauthorized paramedic. We're trying to combine those services. Unfortunately, from what I know in terms of recurrent training, combining fire and police are two jobs that are very different, very hard to find people that want to do them both. And right now we're in a time when we can't find enough people to do either job. It's an interesting idea and there are a few examples, but it's a tough one to pull off because I don't know that we can find the people. But combining EMS with both sides is a really good idea and we're already doing that.
As I mentioned before in the opening remarks, I was on the tannery work group with Tom, and I think there may be one or two other members of that committee here. We worked for close to 2 years to come up with a solution to the Tannery Park issue. And I think we came up with a very definitive idea that this should be a park, maybe with some buildings or residential stuff on there. I don't think we can put any buildings on the property. I have always been a proponent, personally, for it being a green space park in the town of Camden. I was on the Parks and Rec Committee for 10 years, more than 10 years, and the town, we think of a lot of a lot of park space and activities in the town, but there is not a single town-owned playground for children in the town of Camden. There are a couple of swings down at Lake Beach, and that is it. And the tannery location is actually in a wonderful community within walking distance of a lot of people and their families, and it really should be a public green space and also not a dumping ground or staging area for construction equipment for the town of Camden.
So the tannery, for those of us who have lived here for a long time, some of us are burnt out on the tannery. I know it's that thing that we've all been arguing about for decades. I remember when it was a tannery. I remember walking by it. I remember when it burned. I remember the initial arguments about what to do with it. I remember many committees popping up in the newspaper, all with visions of what could happen there. We're still paying off the cleanup bond. Voters and ultimately agreed to take on that property because they agreed to pay $1 million to clean it up, which was not a complete cleanup. And they did it with the understanding that it was going to be turned back around into an economic development type of property. So for a long time, when I first started on the select board, I was very frustrated that it felt like the promise sort of hadn't been kept, that proposals hadn't gone to voters, even though there had been proposals to do something. It seemed like everything got shot down. And so I was very focused on trying to get something out to voters and wanting to kind of fulfill that promise, because it seemed like every time something came along, the select board would get spooked by some negative input and then it would ultimately not go to voters. So that was my big focus at the beginning, feeling like, all right, Camden, I have kids, Camden's got all kinds of park space, we don't need any more parks, we can't take care of the parks we had. So I understand that perspective really well. And I've been arguing with Tom quite a lot over the years. This is one area though where because of what I've learned and because of seeing the topography of the area and just getting a little bit more perspective, and because we did put something out to voters, we fulfilled that sort of mission, something went out to voters that met the sort of initial criteria that had been laid out, and voters voted it down. So to me that was like, okay, that's the best we can do in the economic development category, I think. And now it's time to ask voters to do something else. I think as I've learned more about the challenges that we're facing with climate change, the amount of rain we're getting, the low-lying area, it was initially filled there in order to put the woolen mill there and all of that. It doesn't make sense as a development site anymore. And so, while the word park and playground equipment and all that, I'm not sure about that, I would certainly support that area being protected from development at this point. And I see a lot of public property in the past that has been given up by previous select boards, and I guess I don't want to look back and think, ooh, we made a mistake there. So.
As a lot of you may know, I lived essentially behind the tannery on Cobb Hill Road. And when I would walk to school across the Rawson Street Bridge, certainly I could smell the tannery and what was there and see the little flood and the little brown house next to it from the Donbrook River. But after school, I would often play stickball with my friends. Ted Graffam, Doug Mosier, some of you may know some of them. And it did serve as a decent playground for us living in that community. It does have to be weighed against, though, what we need in town too are really good full-time jobs. Really good full-time jobs help people, they help people move into town. Can this be a facility that handles both a space for play and some space for income and jobs? maybe there's a compromise there that can be reached. Should this go to a vote in Camden? Sure, why not? We should not be taking away people's ability to make a choice. Should we help maybe in making sure we have some unbiased facts, some good facts that show us what the pieces are, coming from, again, an unbiased way? I think that would be good. We know that there's probably some hazardous materials that are left at the site. Should I have been playing stickball with hazardous materials? Maybe not. Should other people? I don't know. When we lived on Mount Batty Street, I think Heidi used to walk Kyle in a stroller. Kyle, I think, was like a year at that time, through that area. Yes, in hindsight, I wish the hazardous materials were not there, but we didn't know about it. But we know that they're there now.
has been cleaned up. It's all clean.
Please do not get into the...
We know that there, according to the comprehensive plan in 2017, that plan actually recommended sale of the property to do something that would earn income. And there are some pieces with the property, it's debatable what has been cleaned, how much has been cleaned, and what covering is currently on that property. While the town owns it, and with any property that the town owns, it should be being maintained in considering what it may be in the future, what it was then, to make sure that it is, again, adequately maintained so it's ready for anything. Should that go to a vote? Sure. Let's give people the choice.
This is going to be a brief answer for me. I believe that using it for a farmer's market is really something that the town values. I value it. The farmer's market used to be directly across from my house because I live right on Washington Street. I now don't mind at all going up there. I think that it's a wonderful thing that when I also have an Airbnb, when people come, that my guests all enjoy it. I think it serves a really important function to have a farmer's market. That's a community gathering space that's positive. I also have concerns about if, ideally, could we get multi-use out of it and have some offices for startups, affordable, yes, in my fantasy world, that's what I would like, but I don't know how realistic that is. But I think it is valuable to remain as a farmer's market.
So when Tom learned I was running for the select board again, he called me right away. Matter of fact, he's about the only person that's called me, and he says, what are you gonna say? Are you gonna vote for it as a park? And Tom, I will tell you, yes, I will vote for it as a park. Yes, I will vote to put it on the ballot. Some of the background of the tannery property, the town tried to give it away to businesses and nobody took it. It was not, and that was taken. We had housing proposals when I was on the board, and the business proposal was turned down. I voted against putting that to the ballot because I didn't believe in that proposal. The housing proposals didn't work, and as I think Ray mentioned, every time you talk about playgrounds for kids, people go, well, they can use the schools. There's playgrounds at all the schools. But the problem, when the schools are in session, the kids are going to school, have a playground, but there is no playground in Camden for preschoolers. There's no place for parents to take preschoolers. And that's important, that early life, that park kind of environment is great. My wife uses the farmer's market almost every week. It's an incredible resource. She loves the people, she loves the vendors, she goes there. If they moved and they threatened to move, it would be a great loss for Camden. It's an important thing to have, and having established park with some things that we don't have anywhere else, I think is important. I think it's time for the town to vote, and it's not a select board decision. It's time for the town to decide if they want to park there, and I think we should put that vote out.
Would somebody else like to ask a question?
When I was on the select board, the watershed school came to us. They've had a lot of students very involved in that, and they brought to us the Global Covenant for Mayors for Climate Change, and I was the person on the select board to first say we should do that, we should join that. One of the things I think I'm not seeing from the current board, when I watch the meetings, and I'm seeing they've just rebuilt the landing because it was necessary, it was in bad shape, but there still is not a design for sea level rise and what's going to happen with that. That's important because that harbor is important, and we've seen with the increasing rain events that we have a problem at the yacht club, which is a town-owned property. That the whole harbor has some problems. We need to deal with that. They have raised the harbor walks are raised a little bit, and it's good for a while, but we need to do more. And anybody can see that we're having increased rain events, and we have to deal with it because the problem is not just the sea level rise. The problem is also the water that's coming from these events. One of the things I hear talking to people, well, it's never happened before. And the problem is there are so many cities and towns around the country that are seeing all sorts of major disasters and going, well, it never happened before. We have to be ahead of the game. We have to work on this. We have to have more conversation about it.
I don't think it's a question of if it's going to happen, it's when. As someone who's been going to select board meetings and hearing, the town actually is all over this, that, they talked about building a breakwater like in Rockland. It's like a fait accompli. We're going to have flooding. They've talked at the science behind it. We've been hearing about it. We've had very knowledgeable people say, this is going to happen. What is Camden going to do about it? It makes the whole Montgomery Dam issue kind of like, doesn't matter because we're going to have to deal with a much larger issue about this massive amount of flooding and all the changes that are going to happen about that. So what is being shared is correct, and I did also read that amazingly good, well done high school project by the students that they did several years ago. So I think we just have to stop kind of holding on to emotional whatever and go with what is really happening, what we're being told, and come up with, and the town already has some amazingly functional solutions, and trust that there's some very smart people who know what they're doing. But change is afoot, and climate change is real, and how can we respond positively right now? I agree, this is happening now, and we have to have our heads out of the sand about it.
Discussing about climate change is tough. In fact, it's so tough it's had different names, from climate change to climate crisis, climate emergency. But whatever name you call it, what's really tough about selling people on climate change and instructing them is it's something that a lot of us really can't see. And this is why it goes back to trusting the government and the government acting in a way that is trustworthy. It's about collecting unbiased data about climate change. I had a question, and in 2014, my son was working for NOAA. He designed an application for the hurricane hunters on where to fly a plane in a hurricane, and they use it. But Ian Sears was the head of the Hurricane Research Division then. And so I said, Ian, so what's the deal about the climate change thing? Is it real or not? And he's like, yeah, Chris, it is real. It's like, okay. I went to a trusted source who I knew had the data and talked to him and asked him. But it's really tough to sell people on something, again, that they can't see. Even though the people might be talking about it, might be the smartest scientists in the world, it is still tough to do something that you can't see every day. And there's so many easy ways to be naysaying about both. But given Ian's remarks to me that yes, climate change is real and there could be impacts, still people are slow to change until they absolutely have to. But we've got a lot of good, caring, smart people in town too. But we really have to make sure that the majority of the people in town agree that we need to do something, that they are in this. The McGonagall watershed covers about half of the town space according to the comprehensive plan. That's a big area. Anything that's half the space in our town is big and should receive some consideration. How fast will this be? There are charts and bars that say. Being a little bit planning ahead, not a bad idea, but we just got to do it smartly with the right amount of money that we can spend to address the things as we see it. But first, get people to be able to trust in the government that we're providing data that's good, clean data, and work with it.
So this is one of those issues that I was only marginally knowledgeable about when I started. And like Mark, I saw a presentation that the Watershed School students had done, and I saw the Harbor Park benches underwater, and I remember thinking, oh my, like that's already happening here? And I figured that it was something that was just, you know, once a year, maybe. And people argued about whether or not this was something. I hear people say, well, this has been happening since, you know, for a very long time. And that's true. Climate scientists say that there is no individual event that, you know, when you have a big rainstorm, you can't say really ever, oh, this was because of climate change. And I think that frustrates some science-minded people when other people go out and say, oh, this is happening because of climate change, this is happening because of climate change. And it gets a little bit too extreme on both sides, and we argue about whether humans are causing it and all of that stuff. I think that what the town needs to do is not spend too much time as a town arguing about how much humans are causing it or not. There are really wonderful organizations that are devoted to that. But we have a lot of infrastructure that is vulnerable to water, whether you believe it's human-caused climate change or not. We have stuff that falls down when there's lots of water. We know that we are getting more intense rain events. We know that we're having more of these storm surge events. And in a very similar way to the way that the wastewater treatment plant came about in Camden, that happened in Camden because in the 1960s, as people were studying this, they were realizing at much higher levels than the town of Camden that we're going to have to figure out a way to treat wastewater. This was going to be a big problem everywhere, and that all of these little towns discharging waste into the ocean needed to do something different. And so there were lots of grants available for towns that got ahead of it and started following recommendations where they could. And Camden was able to take advantage of that. We built our wastewater treatment plant because the comprehensive plan, many committees, many people had already addressed this. So when the funding became available, we were right in line to be able to take advantage of that. And so I think we need to be smart as a community and not miss that opportunity as this next round of challenges comes up. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be redesigned anyway to make it less necessary for humans to intervene and rebuild things over and over again. So we need a lot more conversations, I think, though, like this with experts, not just somebody from the town saying something, because I agree it's very hard just to trust the town on matters of science.
I believe that sea level rise is probably the #1 issue facing Camden in the future. That it's going to be the most expensive issue that we're going to face, much more than any other project that we can think about undertaking. And the next select board, and probably select boards after that, are going to be faced with decisions about a barrier out by Curtis Island to help protect the downtown. We just spent $200,000 or so to rebuild a boardwalk for one event and it wasn't because of water coming down from the watershed, it was the sea level rising and waves coming in. And that's going to happen. We have to really protect the public landing, which is a focal point for this town. It's what people come here for, to see the harbor, and you need to protect that, and we have to protect it for the future. And it's going to be the most expensive, to me, it's going to be the most expensive project that the town of Camden is going to undertake maybe in the next 10, 15 years.
Well, certainly as a systems consultant, transparency and how you resolve conflict is kind of my expertise. And I'm very interested. I gave a talk to the budget committee on groupthink. How many of you know what groupthink is? It's why when Kennedy was president, the terrible decision was made about the Bay of Pigs. When you have a bunch of people together and they don't feel safe to disagree, lousy decisions are made. And I said, as a systems consultant on the budget committee, that I thought groupthink was highly operational, and I gave example after example. And I talked about it, and I said, this has to change. We have to have spirited dialogue where people feel safe to disagree, that we can actually hammer out different kinds of options. So this is something near and dear to my heart. And I also think I don't feel transparency. There's things about money that I'd ask about, or we asked about, and at one point there was this $200,000 and where did it go? And the town office said, well, it's not unusual that it was spent for something else. And I was like, what? That was earmarked for this. How could that have been spent on something else? I was like shocked. I just didn't think I had this naive view that kind of what people decided, yes, that's what happened. Well, that's baloney. That was not happening. So we have to become very involved in consciously being aware of how the committees are working and consciously make a choice to change how we're communicating, because I think it's not very functional. Oh, this way.
Thank you for the question. Again, it's about transparency and resolving conflicts. Both of those items are actually part of the Select Board Charter, and that's the way they're supposed to operate. I know in talking with a lot of people around town that they feel that is not operating as effectively. And I get it. I was talking to someone earlier today about the agendas. Specifically, you want to know what's going to happen at the Select Board, and it is on the town's website. I have attended a few now of the Select Board meetings as well, and just like in the last one, there was discussion about who had the right agenda in the meeting. The agendas are supposed to be sent onto the website the Wednesday prior to the Tuesday meeting. That should give the public plenty of notice, as well as the Select Board members, to know what are we going to be addressing. That has not been happening as effectively. And it really comes down to accountability. And you should be holding both the Select Board members, and the Select Board should also be holding the town manager accountable to get that information out. Talking with another person this past weekend, she had mentioned to me an interesting idea. And it bothered me that people do stand up and they do the public hearing, any sort of thing that's not on the agenda that people want to talk about, and then it seems to like magically go away, in my experience. Her idea, I thought, was a great one. Why doesn't the Select Board work on setting the agenda at the close of the meeting? Take the last 15 minutes and work on the agenda there in public about the items, especially the new items that were brought up as the non-agenda items. Let's openly talk about what's going to be on there. I know the new Select Board Charter speaks to the chair and the town manager will get together and they'll decide on the agenda. Well, I think some of that is why people are saying, how does this happen? How do these things get on there? Why wasn't my thing on there? The second part. So there, something to do, let's place that agenda happening right in the public view. And let's get the agendas out early, let's have standards, and let's stick to them, measure them. How often is the agenda going out late? How often, how many times does it take for the minutes to be correct? Thank you.
There are so many things wrong with town government, and you can focus on any number of those things. I started off by focusing on many of them, and I'm now focusing on some different ones. At the beginning, I kind of thought, looking from the outside, like, oh, this is because they're doing this and this and this, and it's this very strategic thing where it's masterminded behind the scenes. And what I've realized is that most of the time, it's a failure of communication. It's an attempt to accommodate a business that's trying to open at the last minute and getting their stuff in late. And there are a lot of good intentions that are behind a messy process. And anything that relies on volunteers, I mean, the select board is run by the people who are elected, and then we choose a chair, and none of us are professionals at it. I have major disagreements about sort of the style of the meetings. I would like everybody to be able to talk all night long. The select board jokes about how I could never be chair probably because we'd be there for hours and hours and hours. I fall on the other end of that extreme of wanting to talk about everything. But I've also seen really good comments from people who think that they came to a select board meeting because they have a business application, they have a lot to do, and they're there just in case they need to be able to speak to that item, and they don't appreciate it when they end up having to stay for 2.5 hours while we talk about apple trees or something. So I do see that there's like, there are two sides to it. I think that we need to try to separate some of the business meeting type of stuff from new opportunities to really talk about the issues. Because I understand the people that value efficiency and want to move through things quickly, but we're not providing these opportunities to really talk robustly. When I started on the select board, none of the workshops were filmed and none of the committee meetings. And so I do feel that that's an area that's been greatly improved. I remember as a budget committee member going to a select board workshop where it wasn't filmed and they decided on everything they wanted to vote on for the budget. And then the next meeting, that wasn't filmed or anything, the next meeting they voted on it all. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is where all the action happens. So we now do film absolutely everything. Hiring more people that could really competently do the communication part of it is, I think, really needed, because each of our department heads doesn't necessarily have that skill on their own. But
Well, I think as Mark and Allison can attest, I'm one of those people who gets up at select board meetings in the citizens' comments section in the beginning of the meeting. And over the last couple of years, it's become very frustrating, and I can feel for all of you in the audience who do the same, that you don't get an answer. You feel like thank you for standing up, and you don't get an answer. You don't get any answer in a timely fashion, report back from the select board, and you feel like you're being ignored. And I think this is just the wrong attitude that has happened in the last couple of years. And I can't speak to what it was like 20 years ago, but it seems that it's happened over the last few years. And I think as far as transparency, what really needs to happen is when issues are raised, it's not just for the select board to talk about it among themselves, or that they need to put it on the next agenda, or an agenda when in a very few weeks or whatever, and report back to the citizens, not just the person who raised the issue, but the citizens. And if there's a question for the town management, that should also go through the select board and be answered.
First, I agree with Ray. Watching the select board from a distance for a year now has been interesting because I agree that the citizens' comments have been, it's not been a good process. And I think things need to go on an agenda quicker, and if it's asked for so it can be discussed. And if it doesn't, people need to know a reason why. One of the things that I was vehemently opposed about that we changed a couple years ago, and I voted against it, was for decades, the select board reports and the manager's report were at the beginning of the meeting. So when everybody was here, was paying attention, you got to hear, what did your select board people do? What did the report they do? And a couple years ago, it was moved to the end of the meeting. By then, you've got 3 stragglers sitting there waiting for those reports. And I want to know right off what the select board members are doing. I think that should change. It should go back the way it was because it worked really well that way. And I disagreed with it when the change was made, and I still disagree with it. And especially watching it, I think it's been a problem. But that would give you more transparency right away. And I think that's important.
Thank you for your question. When Heidi and I have been driving through town sometimes, we comment on the lighting that was put in probably in the mid-90s and how it was difficult to be able to see, in fact, the people in the crosswalks. When we moved away from the higher street lights, and it does make it, I think, difficult down in that neck of the woods. Now, I know it's the intersection that you're talking about because I used to live around the corner from that too. You must be right next to Judy. There is certainly new housing that is in the area that, when I lived there, was just a field. In 1978, behind our house in Cog, it was a nice field behind there, and we'd snowmobile through it or maybe ride a motorcycle through. When my son comes from Boston with his significant other, Olivia, they find that it was amazing to see the stars. She was consistently a city dweller, and it is nice when I come home at night too, and I can see the stars nicely from where I happen to live. I'm lucky. It's a little bit of the rural part of the town. That is something that we probably should take a look at, though. If there are concerns that we can address to keep the dark sky while also maintaining the public safety in the area, why not take a look? What's the harm? I appreciate you asking.
This is one of those issues where nobody agrees. I personally really love looking at the stars. I like the new street lights for the most part. I've gotten comments on the same day in the same area from people saying that they want it brighter because it's not safe enough, and people saying that they want it darker so that they can see the stars. I don't know with the town streetlights, they do have the ability to adjust them, and so that has been a possibility in some places where it makes sense to ratchet them up or down or put covers on them. A lot of it, though, I think the bigger issue for some people are private residences or the middle school or different things. So I guess it depends on where the light is coming from. That is something the planning board started taking up a while back. It would require an ordinance. We actually don't have any kind of dark skies special ordinance. It's like a lot of things in Camden that we just kind of have by default. People think that there's something in the ordinance that protects that and keeps it, but it's actually just luck some of the time that we have those things. So I would definitely support a group of people looking at that. The thing is that town staff time gets so easily monopolized by so many different things that if they just have to do all the research, write an ordinance, do all the public engagement. Just that, collecting all these opinions to try to make everybody happy could take everybody's time. So figuring out like how we can target town staff time to do things is a challenge. But maybe we could start by designating certain areas as dark sky areas. But I was walking home the other day on the sidewalk and I was like, oh, I kind of understand what people are saying about it being a little too dark. So I started to, it's a very hard thing to make everybody happy, but I do love I can see the stars on Mechanic Street at my house, so I look in one direction.
Thank you for the question. We're going to have both sides of that issue always. And I think I appreciate you bringing it up. I don't know if there is a solution that's going to satisfy everybody. And I see both the safety side and the natural side of having dark skies. I think it's something that the town can look at, but I don't know if everybody's going to be totally happy with the decision there.
It was, Allison, 3 years, maybe 4 years ago, that the Energy Committee brought to the Select Board, and we championed buying out the street lights from CMP and changed them all to LED lights. And we did that because it will save a lot of money. And the other thing that can happen is those lights are, as Alice mentioned, they are adjustable. So the one thing you can do is go to the town office and say, this is where I live, these are the specific lights that I have a problem with, and see if they can be adjusted. And maybe talk to your neighbors and say, we're all in agreement, and then they can be adjusted. Again, I don't know about, like Ray said, some people like it, some people don't, but that's one of the things we worked on, is making it so that we can turn them up, turn them down where it needs to be. So you should do that. Maybe get with your neighbors and go to the town office and say, we'd like these lights adjusted.
I never try to talk baloney if I don't know about anything. And I have never even considered this question, honestly. But I agree with what you just said, because if there's a way they can adjust them, because again, this town is small enough that if a few people ask, when I'm talking about, it could be more of a pure democracy. If those neighbors in that said, let's turn them down, it would seem that that would be reasonable, and go for it, and good luck.
I too loved the town meeting form of government. I have seen Steve in action there too, and he's really really knowledgeable and really persuasive. And I think for people that are really paying attention and enjoy public debate about issues and can be there at that time, it works really well and it's really enjoyable. What I found though is that no matter how hard I try to make my husband think it's fun to argue about town government or vote in public or get up and debate about things, he's the type of person, as many people are, who just don't appreciate voting publicly and arguing in public. Most people, it seems, prefer to be able to do that in private. I think there's a lot of benefit to the type of open forum where you can talk about all those issues, but the quick kind of be brought up to speed really fast and listen to your neighbors arguing, and then you can all vote in front of each other. When we asked people, we put a non-binding question on the ballot and asked people if they wanted to vote by that format in the Opera House where you all have to raise your hand and get up and talk, or if they wanted to go to the form with the paper ballot where you can do absentee voting and do it at your own time. When we asked people, it was overwhelming in favor of wanting to continue or wanting to do the process where you can vote privately. So I think we need to find a better way of recreating that town meeting experience on different issues so people can talk about things. but not make that tied to voting, because there are so many people that are just not going to ever be able to show up at that time. And a lot of them are people with families, or people that travel, or people that work the night shift. So I wouldn't support going back to that at this time.
When I first moved here, a friend of mine named Ralph Kelly, some of you may remember him, he said, "Hey, Ray, you should go to the town meeting. It's going to be this June." I had never been to a town meeting at the, well, that we had at the Opera House. I had never been to one before, and I was absolutely enthralled, happy, and enjoyed the debate that went on at the town meeting, and especially about the budget. It was the opportunity for the citizens of the town of Camden to decide on what expenses that were suggested by the select board and what recommendations came from the budget committee, and you could really negotiate there at the town meeting to change what the select board wanted for a budget, which was really usually just what the town manager wanted for the budget. And now we have a setup where when you go to vote this June, you're going to be able to say yes or no to the select board's recommendation on the town budget. You won't have a chance to switch in some of the recommendations from the budget committee. And I think it's just taken away one of the real beginnings of, well, one of the roots of our democracy here in New England. We are the only ones that had town meetings and like this. And it is part of our past, our heritage, and I would really recommend that we go back to that type of town meeting.
I miss it a lot, and I think, but I understand the situation. What we used to have is sometimes, I've been in the town meeting with the Opera House, has been completely filled, and I've been in the Opera House when there have been 30 people in there, making those town decisions. I think it's appropriate that the whole town gets to vote on things, but I don't like the way it's laid out now on the ballot. But my suggestion, thinking about it as Stephen brought it up, is I would suggest that we have what used to be the town meeting, have it on Monday, the day before the election, in the Opera House, invite people, go through all the stuff that we used to do at the town meeting, have it, now we have the opportunity to televise it. We have 3 cameras in the auditorium. It can be televised, it can be filmed, it can be watched live, and get people to make all the comments they want to make that they don't get to make, so then the next day when people go to the town office, the town safety building to vote, they can vote with some more knowledge. I'm a real fan of voting on being educated and knowledgeable about what you're voting in. I hate looking at the ballot and having to explain to people, well, this is what this means, this is what this means. We should have a forum for that. So I'd suggest doing it the day before and having all those discussions, and then people can make the private ballot, which involves the whole town. That was one of the problems when there was 30 people making the decisions.
I'm of course very in favor of open and that people know what's going on. And I was delighted when Linda Clancy, who's the editor of the Penn Bay Pilot, said that she was going to send us all a whole bunch of questions that we would all answer. So she said the most read edition of the paper is for the Camden Select Board, because everyone wants to know, who the heck are these people? Who am I supposed to vote for? So that's great. That's all of our answers are going to be there, and people can read everything that we think about all these very important issues. Those are the kinds of things that make democracy truly democracy, and of course that's what we're all about here. And what's fun for me, and I just want to say this, it's really fun for me that all these good people, any of us, are all like really nice people that want to do a good job. I have this renewed faith, and I just want to share that, you know, I think that open communication is great. I think what we're going to do with Linda Clancy and that people are going to know our positions, I hope that we're going to have more openness about this and people will feel pleased that they've made informed decisions.
Thank you. And I like your idea of the hybrid approach for that, because that is important. Sometimes when you get too efficient, you lose a lot. Giving people an opportunity to speak up and hear different opinions is important. And also, if a hybrid approach, for whatever reason, is not appropriate, or there's some law that says we can't do it, which I don't know if there is or isn't, operating the town government in a way throughout the year so that everyone feels like they can openly discuss an item without either being interrupted or hurried along or summarily dismissed. That openness needs to happen, and that can start now as we work on maybe a bigger issue of returning to the town meeting. I remember some of the hotly debated town meetings when we were with MB&A, and MB&A was making some changes and thought about making things. Those are fun. And I also heard it from some of that Heidi used to work for. She used to work with the Weymouths early on when we were dating, and I had really good conversations with them. And one of the pieces that they also missed was the town meeting, being able to discuss the budget and the items and what's really involved there with the different items. Just like meeting here, what's important for us is this moment right now where we can be with you and ask, and you can ask your questions. We'll let you know what we think. But that's why it's important. This is, in a way, a piece of that town meeting-ness that should go on. So you can say, okay, now I know more about what Ray or Allison are doing and thinking. And this is how we should be able to do it. If we can do something like this, I mean, hey, we're meeting now together as a group, and we're going to vote on it the day after my birthday. Great. That's how it should be. You should be able to go into the ballot box and understand what it is that you're looking at. What impact is it going to have? Maybe someone's going to ask a thought-provoking question that you did not think of before, and how to look at something. It may open your eyes. If we all work with an open mind, we can certainly build bridges together and understand what's going on better when we listen to each other. Thank you.
Well, as a member of the Save the Damn Falls Committee, I think it's pretty obvious where I stand on the Montgomery Dam. It's, just to me, it's a treasure in the town, or should be. It doesn't look like a treasure right now, but it is a treasure. It's part of our history, and I think the town of Camden has been very good at times in preserving its history and cherishing its history. As far as the rest of the watershed, as far as the ideas of fish ladders, etc., we can come to some kind of I believe we can come to some kind of a compromise and some kind of a solution that both creates a better, cleaner watershed and saves Montgomery Dam. And that's what I look forward to working towards.
Gosh, Dan, I'm shocked. I never even thought that would have come up in this meeting. Again, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I'm definitely for river restoration. There's recent articles about the success of China Lake and what's happened with the alewives returning, what that does to the watershed and everything like that. But that can be a separate issue from the dam, because the dam can be, can be there, can be a fish ladder, can be not be there. River restoration, I think, is really important. What it'll do for, I think it'll help the economy, it'll help the fishermen, it might help keep alewives are food for lobsters, and may help keep lobsters in town. The Montgomery Dam is an interesting situation. Again, in Los Angeles, I was a swiftwater rescue technician. I'm certified in swiftwater rescue. I'm very aware of how dangerous it can be. Most of you may or may not know that most of our downtown is in a FEMA flood zone. Our Emergency Operations Center is in the Congregational Church because it's not allowed to be in our public safety building because the public safety building's in a flood zone. So the thing I'm most interested in the dam is, will it cause any flooding problems? And I'm not sure about that. I went, after the big storm the other day, I went and stood there by the dam and I watched the water. Now I know that part of the Smiling Cow has a building that's underneath and that's been flooded a little bit on these things. And I thought about the dam. I looked at the buildings. The thing that's really important in reading everything that's been written about the buildings is the integrity of those buildings is really important. And there's been some discussion about if the water level's down, it creates problems with their foundations and stuff like that. And that's important too. And I had a conversation with Dave St. Laurent. I asked him about it. I said, I want to know about what you think, what could happen. A side note, one of the things he said, they're talking about keeping the level of Montgomery Dam up. In working underneath, they've discovered there was a drain attached to once a tree that comes out of the Montgomery property, and it's actually that there's a pipe there that's broken that's washing away part of the foundation for their deck. It's all on private property. It's not something the town can do. The owners of the buildings have to deal with it. That defeats some of the ability to keep the level up. And one of the things I talked to Dave, I said, what if we take it down a couple feet so that, and put a fish ladder in so that we're no longer, what we're seeing is in the way the level, and I've looked at the maps and the graphs, so that there is no flooding at Smiling Cow, but there's still, everything that the town is important. There may be some compromise in there, but it all comes down to safety and the integrity of the town and the bridge underneath.
Everyone wants to believe, I think, that there's going to be a compromise, that we could have a fish ladder and save the dam and also deal with all the flooding. I really wish that was the case. From what I've listened to, and I've listened to several speakers come, I don't have that confidence that that is a realistic solution. And I so there goes my election. I'm saying it, and that's okay, because that's what I honestly believe. I don't think it's going to work. With the flooding situation and all the things that I've listened to from the experts, we can't have it all. And, I'm just going to stand on that, because I think if they could tell us that and say yes, and then I talked to this guy and he said fish ladders, oh boy, okay, whatever, you want to believe in the fish ladder thing, okay. So I've accepted that, and I have a fondness for the dam too. I love Camden, and I love walking by the library and all of it. But I also know that if it's going to be the safety of our town and everything going with the warming of the ocean and the flooding situation, points that we need a systemic solution.
As I said earlier, the Montgomery watershed is a big deal. It's half the town. We have to know what we're going to do with half of the land area. And no, it's not Chris Nolan saying it's half the town. It was in the comprehensive report of 2017. It says the Montgomery watershed is half the town. And I've spent a good amount of time talking with groups from both sides, and I've learned a lot from each about it. And this is where I feel that there really needs to be, when you're dealing with a big issue, and it's a big issue that you can't see. You can see the dam and what it looks like today, but it's really hard to see and envision problems that might be coming down the road. And that's why decisions that are made about the watershed need to be done with facts that you can trust. The facts need to be unbiased. As an auditor that I do for technology, we have to live with the facts. When we do governance audits for boards, we're looking at facts. We have to make sure we can trust those facts. Another thing I was listening to the other day said, taking something away from you is always perceived as 2 times worse than if I gave you something. It feels bad because maybe sometimes choice is getting taken away. Should this go to a vote? Yes, I was disappointed in that discussion. I think it was like 3 select board meetings ago. Someone said, hey, well, we're talking about the budget. Why don't we take a motion to go ahead and say, hey, let's spend the $250,000 on the dam to maintain it. I do believe, yes, the town should be maintaining their properties, and this is one of them. Maintain it, at least in the short term. Build trust by the town that you're going to go ahead and do something. Build the consensus fairly. Ensure that people are able to ask questions and be responded to respectfully about those issues. We need to build a bridge between the 2 opposing elements to come up with a solution like Ray was mentioning that can meet in the middle. There may be solutions. Heidi and I enjoyed looking at the fish ladders down in Damascotta last weekend. It was something that someone I maybe disagreed with said, hey, go check it out, and it was cool. Be open and be honest. Deal with facts.
So one of the things I think has been a mistake on the select board is that we haven't had a chance recently to really talk about this very much. At the beginning, when I first got on the board, we had a bunch of dam-related stuff that came up. There was a Seabright Dam, which went from $25,000 to $300,000 that we needed to put money into. The Montgomery Dam stuff was more expensive than anybody thought. And a lot of us were like, hold on, what are all these dams? What do they do? I got all kinds of comments from people, and really living in Camden my entire life, I never completely knew, okay, this is what this dam does, and this is what this dam does, and this is where the river goes, and all of that. So it's been a learning exercise. I know that there are compromises. There is a whole range of options. Some of it depends on which problems we think are needing to be solved and how much federal funding or agency funding we want to get or not get. The way things are right now with the Montgomery Dam is, I mean, I see people every day down there, even on days when some people say it's looking terrible. I spend a lot of time down in the harbor filming fish and doing things with my kids, and people take pictures in front of that thing wherever there's water coming out. Water falling over rocks is beautiful. There's so much beautiful stuff down there. When one part of the dam doesn't look that great, water's coming over the other side, it's beautiful from that side. So people do disagree about which are the most beautiful parts of it. Right now, we have a situation where that dam, in order to look marginally okay, it has to be full, that pool behind it. And when the pool has to be emptied, it looks awful. There are old fuel tanks there, there's all this trash. The buildings weren't designed to be like aesthetically pleasing underneath, and so it just looks like a horrible mess when it's drained. But if we could take advantage of the massive amount of federal funding that's available right now and agree on a level that it should just be set at, so that it never has to be empty. What people really, really hate is the empty part. The only reason we have to empty it is because we've designed everything around there to need it empty. Whenever there's some buildings that in order to do any work on them, you have to empty that pool. So if we could all work together and say, all right, the level is going to be what it's going to be. We're going to use some of this funding to help the buildings so that you don't have to do work on them with that pool empty. It could just be granite pilings. And so it would just be a set it and forget it kind of thing. Or pair that with the Main Street Bridge replacement and use some kind of a superstructure. There are a lot of options out there. We just have to decide what's important.
I watched the budget committee meetings, I watched the select board meeting, and I have I saw the arguments about the town salaries, and I have some thoughts about that. Number one, the Social Security, 8.2% or whatever it was, when it came out, the recommendations came out last October. And the biggest check I get, and so I understand a lot of the anxiety, is from Social Security, because I'm 71. And I got in January, I got my 8 whatever it is percent raise. My wife at her job got her 8% cost of living raise. The town is now waiting to give the people, one of the suggestions is, well, the Social Security index now is like 3%, let's give them 3%. But they've had to wait from October until now, almost a year to get the raise. As inflation is coming up, what that 8% they're getting is not the same as it would have been back then we all got it. I mean, you got an 8% raise in Social Security. How many other people got 8% raises in their jobs? Just because we have the ability to say, well, I don't want to give it to them because they're town employees. That's not fair, because if you're the person working, it's important. We lost one of our key members in the town office this year. She went to Rockport for a better job. It's hard, took a long time, it took a few months to replace her. It's really hard to find employees. And I'm one of the people, I'm the only person in the current select board and the past that's worked with an older select board, different town manager. I worked with 2 other town managers besides Audra, and I've worked with a whole bunch of different employees in the town office. Right now, the changes we have the best town employees we've ever had, and some of them we have because we were competitive salary-wise. And get what you pay for. And if we don't take care of our people, they will leave. And you know how hard it is for people to find good people. You know, they're getting their raise 6 or 8 months later than all the rest of us got it. And I don't think it's fair for us to go, oh, well, it's no longer 8%, now it's only 3%. They're gonna have to wait another year for their 3% raise. And the town this is an unusual year. 3 years ago, they got a 0% cost of living raise. You gotta know that as well. That there's times, and at the time, the town was said, well, we need to come up with a reference, and the consensus was that everybody should base everything on Social Security. And it's not fair for all of us to get it and then say to them, oh, we're giving you too much money. It's not fair. If I were working in a company and they did it to me, I'd be really upset.
Okay, I'm going to disagree, because the whole reason that I was on the budget committee, and the whole reason I became on the budget committee was this pattern of continual increases. And I spoke very clearly against the 8% COLA raise. What the budgets committee suggested is that people on the lower end of the salary ranges would get the 8%, and it would be, of course, it would be prorated. Camden pays incredibly competitive salaries. We looked across similar jobs across Waterville, Augusta, comparing everything. We didn't just come up with this in a willy-nilly fashion. We've said, okay, they get paid very well. How can we make this fair? Let's give the 8% to the folks who aren't making as much money, and we'll have it be, adjusted. We were trying to be fiscally responsible, and I think that's what I'm still interested in Camden becoming fiscally responsible. I am tired of that every single thing is increased with usually zero discussion. It's just increase, increase, increase. I don't have that option on a fixed income. I'm there, and I'm not complaining because I'm very blessed, but there is a pattern that I think we have to be aware of. I, as a professional, it was only 2 years ago I was working, I didn't get 8% raises. That was not standard in my life as someone who would expect a raise. It was much smaller than that. So I think we do value our employees. I do think we treat them well, and look across other towns and compare. I don't think Camden is doing a bad job at all.
I remember working at MBNA, and a couple of years I got a merit increase of 7%. And it was a high percentage. But it was based on merit. Full disclosure, I too got an 8.7% raise. I am a disabled veteran, and the veterans did go ahead and get that as well. Unlike the town, however, I did not get a disabled veteran 7% increase last year. What I disagreed with the way the budget was done this year, I really liked that proposal that was made by the budget committee, because what it did is it focused, what's tough about percentage increases, those with the highest salaries benefit the most. And you had a person who benefited the most with one of the highest salaries recommending the 8.7% increase. I don't think that's fair. That's why I thought the way the budget committee put that out, it said, hey, I think it was like a $2,400 increase plus 3% after that. I think after $50,000 it kind of evened out. But I thought that was a very helpful way to look at it. Yes, we do need to have high salary employees too. But the majority of the workers aren't a high salary group. Giving somebody who's earning $40,000 a year an 8% increase is like what, $3,000, $3,200? You know, someone who makes a $120,000 increase just got themselves like an $11,000 raise. Big difference. I don't like that difference. Not when it's not merit-based. Thank you.
Being a town employee is a really different experience than the type of jobs that many of us have. My husband also doesn't have these guaranteed increases built in, and I bring that up quite a bit, and some of the time these automatic step increases that town employees have felt like, you know, unfair, and it should all be some merit-based system. What most towns do and most government jobs is not, they provide a certain guarantee, and if we were to depart from that, nobody was able to point to another town that had some perfect model where there's a complete meritocracy and an all-knowing budget committee gets together and figures out the perfect system. There are problems with the way that we're doing it right now, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, we just hired a consultant that is looking at best practices in HR for governments. But what you also have to remember is, I mean, first of all, we're losing police officers to the county and other places really fast. We're down like 4 police officers in the department right now. So there are a number of people in town who really object to that. I think that needs to be like our first priority to get that back up. So if anybody's interested, there's a really good benefits package. But I think the police union contract is tied to Social Security. So that was negotiated a couple years ago, or it was last year. And so when you start, that's the only union that the town has. The rest of the town employees aren't unionized because, for the most part, in the past, they felt like they could count on town administration to treat them fairly and not feel the need to unionize. So, but when they start seeing that one group of employees is going to get what Social Security is giving them, and then, but all these other employees who aren't in the police department are not going to get that, that's demoralizing. And I think that we need to be really careful not to be reckless about the way that we go about salaries. I think it's hard for town employees to have to listen to budget committees and select boards every year. You know, we say things that are wrong sometimes, and that would be, I think, really hard in a job to have a live stream conversation about how much you deserve to be paid for everybody to see. So that's a different thing than most of us have to go through, and I think with the environment in the workforce right now, it's really important to, try to retain the employees we have.
Okay, well, I was on the budget committee with Mary Beth, and we voted 9-0 to pass what we had recommended on a different pay scale for the town employees, not a blanket 8.7% raise, following, I believe it was 7% the year before. It's town policy, the town manager in making her recommendations, that was the town policy. But I think we had some very valuable people on the budget committee who looked at it and came up with a different recommendation to try to save the taxpayers some money. And yes, it's adding somebody else's part of their payroll. Everybody was going to get a raise, and a substantial raise, but not an across-the-board 8.7% raise. And this is something that if next year, next October, it's say 6% again, you're talking about over a 20% raise for every single town employee, no matter what their level is, over a 3-year period. And I don't think the taxpayers are going to be able to afford that for too many years.
So what do you have left?
Okay, I'm a substance abuse therapist. That was my whole life's career. And I actually support it because I believe in democracy and individual self-determination. And ultimately, that is what I'm respecting. And I also know about helping, that is not going to be the thing that causes high school students to use marijuana. That does not fly with me. So I would support it because I think people are grown-ups and they can make decisions about their own life. Oh, this way.
I did speak at this at one of the town meetings. I didn't intend to speak that day. What I really disagreed with, I really don't like seeing things that are only for themselves. And doing that ordinance the way it was helped them. They wrote the ordinance. It didn't have much in it. I'm not good about that. I don't care if you have a dog walk business and you say, hey, I want a dog walk business, but the state says I need a 4-foot leash. But you stand up and say, I want an 8-foot leash for my ordinance, and there are 67 other towns that have, nobody has a 4-foot leash. They all have, I don't know of any that are 8-foot leashes. And then if you look up on your phone as you sit there talking to me, and you say, shoot, look at all these towns. They all have 4-foot leashes. That's what happened in the meeting. The guy who wanted the ordinance said, I am not aware of any towns, any of the 64 towns, 7 towns in Maine, that have 1,000-foot restrictions in place. So I got out my phone. I did what any person would do these days, they Google it. 4 out of 5 that I looked up in 10 minutes had 1,000-foot restrictions in place. And even towns like Bangor had additional restrictions, not within 2,500 feet of one another of a particular business. So when someone is trying to sell me a bill of goods, and they either didn't know that there really are a lot of other towns in Maine that maintain that 1,000-foot thing, and you're telling me you didn't know about that, and then you go on to tell me that, oh, there's no other issues along with this thing. Again, if I had a dog walk business and I said, there's never a dog problem, then I don't say he might pee on your lawn. But if I said, hey, he might poop, but I'll pick it up, at least I've addressed it. But what the person didn't do, he didn't address the issues that are out there and the possible negative issues that were out there. It was all happiness, rainbows, let's do this. I really still think it's not fit for consumption. It's half-baked. There's a lot of other things that could have been in the ordinance that would make it much more restrictive and maybe more acceptable to people if those were put in place, but it was too self-serving.
First of all, there's no scenario, nothing on the ballot would allow 2 marijuana stores on Main Street. The setbacks from, under both scenarios, the 500 or 1,000-foot setback from schools and educational facilities and all of that would keep them off of Main Street. So, I think that, the thing about this is it's not the if we vote yes, if the town passes this, one thing that Camden has is the select board doesn't have much power over many things, but we do have quite a bit of power over individual businesses because of the licensing process that we have. So one of the things I've not enjoyed about being on the select board is lots of complaining about other businesses in town. One business gets to do one thing or the other. There is this complaint to the select board about different businesses in hopes sometimes that we'll stop them or change them. And most of the time I find in Camden that it's not necessary or appropriate for the select board to try to shut a business down or not renew their license. Seen that happen a few times, and it's really like demoralizing for the business. So, however, what that should tell you is that anytime, just like a liquor license, and it would be, we haven't had to do it for a marijuana business, but when that permit comes up for approval by the select board, there's a public hearing, there can be conditions placed on that by the select board. It comes back up after a year for people to be able to say, I had this problem and that problem in the police department. And so there is a more robust review that will happen for any individual business that wants to open should this pass. That will be reassuring to some people and probably make no difference to others. I personally will probably vote yes on both of these. I have kids. I worry about lots of things they do downtown. I object to many of the things that they want to do. We talk about different things. I don't see a cannabis store as something that was that?
Low one time. I forgot the 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, so, anyway, I'm probably on the yes side, but not to on Main Street, because that can't happen.
I yield one of my minutes to you. I believe your question was how we were going to vote. And really, I don't want to tell you, mainly because I don't want to influence anybody else as to how I will vote on this issue. But I'll give you a little bit of a hint. I have never used marijuana.
That's 2 of us. I've never used it either. And I grew up in the 60s, and when I saw it greatly abused, and then I went into the record business in Los Angeles. I was the vice president of Warner Brothers Records. I've seen more drug use than probably all of you put together have seen. I don't like it. I've seen it ruin people's lives. I've seen marijuana ruin people's lives. My problem with cannabis and them in stores is not the individuals that want to do stores in Canada. My problem is big money brings it to the state voting things, because big money is behind it nationally. And I think it's a big problem, because I have 2 articles. If you want to make some notes, just last week in the Washington Post, there was an article on May 3rd called "Parents Are Not Ready for the New Reality of Teen Cannabis Use." And then there's a great editorial in the New York Times. It was June 16, 2019. Marijuana damages young brains. States that legalize it should set a minimum age of 25 or older. The problem is the votes came in to legalize it, and that we're not careful enough in how it was managed, how it was used, and I think it's a big problem. And I disagree that I think a lot of older faces here, and how many of you remember you or one of your friends going outside, just having a friend who's a couple years older, go, hey, can you get me some beers in the liquor store and stuff like that? More availability makes it more available for kids. And one of the things, I've seen it just blossom in Maine. If you drive up Route 1, I remember there used to be 3 independent stores in Bath as you're driving north on Route 1. And now within 1 block, there are 3 cannabis stores. And if you drive through Rockland, you can't go 50 feet without seeing another cannabis store. And so we don't need it. If people want it, we get it, and for their personal use, that's fine, but I don't think we're careful enough about it. We made some bad decisions about it. It's dangerous for children, it's dangerous for people up to 25 if you do the research, and I think it's just making it easier to get, I think is a serious problem. So you can maybe figure out how I'm going to vote on it, but maybe that gives you a clue. But I think it's a problem, and I think being an oasis for and thinking about our children is not a bad thing.
I don't know. I don't know why they would. But I do remember not too long ago, there was a big discussion about should we turn Bob's Golf into a bar or restaurant. Well, and it was no, because it's too close to the Congregational Church. If I recall, I picked up my daughter there a couple of times over the past year when she was living with us, before she moved back to Boston. She's over at Bob's Golf, or whatever it's called today, but to me it's always Bob Oxton's Bob Golf. My father, who's here, he can vouch, though I might get the year wrong, that I think it was like 1983 when he came back from the FBI Academy. He went to the FBI and the Secret Service Academy. And it was like, think of this, early 80s, and he came back and it was like his big thing was, though they got the number of years wrong, he came back and said, in 20 years, they say that smoking will be a misdemeanor and smoking pot will be legal. So he was off by a few years. But that was still interesting. Why can't that rule apply? I don't know. I know in talking with my father, who still is active with the state police, that there are still issues with how can you tell when somebody's under the influence of marijuana versus alcohol? Are the rules to determining that, are they good enough yet to say this is bad, this person is under the influence? Those things aren't ready yet, still, and that's an issue. But as far as, the feet setback that they have for alcohol, I mean, things do change. I mean, it used to be where the goat place used to be the state-run liquor store right next to Haskell and Corthell, where I used to work. And that was the place where you went. And now you can go to the Barnacle or Maritime, or you can go to the Stop and Go, maybe you can get some stuff. Things do change, laws do change. The important thing is giving the people the right to make that choice. The laws that we have are determined ultimately by vote. People have the right to vote. We should ensure that they keep that and operate the democracy the way it should be.
I mean, people smoke marijuana in Camden, they consume marijuana in Camden. There are businesses and have always been businesses where once in a while you might walk by and you're like, oh, that smells like pot. And it was before any of it was legal at all. Harbor Park used to be the place where teenagers would go and try to buy it, and then they would drive through Bayview Street and do crazy. I mean, all of this stuff has been happening. It happens with alcohol too. It's the idea that we have some kind of oasis in Camden where everybody's protected from negative things is crazy, and I think that's what some of us resist a little bit, this idea that we have this perfect picking place where we have no problems. It's not true. It never has been true. Sometimes just that very idea that we are this perfect place where everybody should be perfect is what causes major mental health problems. So nobody's perfect. We live in a town where at any night there might be more people at an AA meeting. Pot stores aren't going to cause a bunch of people to come to Camden just to get it, for precisely the reason that we've all said that they're all over the place. So I know different business owners feel differently about this, but in talking to a bunch of the inn owners, they've said they're sick of sending people away. They're staying in these nice places, and they're telling them they have to go to Rockland. So I was a bartender at Peter Ott's for a while, and I loved that. I loved listening to people. Sometimes people would come in and they had stopped drinking a long time ago for various reasons, and if one of those people that's not going to be drinking wants to have a marijuana gummy that they bought down the street that was organically grown in Hope and overseen by the Camden Police Department, all of that, I mean, I think there's a way it could work, and I don't really like the idea of stigmatizing people that would choose to consume one substance versus another. I definitely don't think I don't want them going to Walgreens and crushing up Sudafed and creating something out of that. There are all kinds of bad things that can happen in the town, and I think we need to be informed about the dangers of all of it and try to educate ourselves. And so I do think that looking at it through an alcohol lens probably is what makes sense here.
I think your question was really about enforcement and rules and everything for marijuana. And if this does pass, I have all the confidence in the select board, the town management, and especially the police department of making sure that the laws are enforced for that business. I don't think it's just the way it's going to work if it does pass.
Basic main thoughts about, I think it's a false argument, well, we do it with liquor, we should do it with marijuana. To me, that's sort of like saying, well, we've made mistakes about the way we handle liquor for the last 100 years. So let's go ahead and do it again with marijuana until we solve the problems of improper usage when it's safe. Now, I want to say one thing that's really clear. On the other end of marijuana, I've always been a huge proponent of medical use. I think that's really important. There are uses for cannabis that are so important and so necessary for people that need it. And I don't want you to mistake that there are good times and bad times to use things. And I just think more knowledge, more education is important. And I don't think we need to run down the money train just because it's the hot thing right now.
I agree that the select board and the town will make thoughtful decisions in terms of monitoring this. I also don't believe that we can tell people what to do and monitor their own behavior. And again, I'm an addictions person, but people are going to use what they're going to do. But I think we have a very sophisticated board in the town that will come up with, I think, a reasonable solution regarding this question. Thanks.
I live on 27 Claybrook Road, a mile north of the state park.
79 Mechanic Street.
14 Cove Road.
Uh, 49 Washington Street.
14 Ragged Mountain Road.
When I first started on this process, the first thing that John French told me was listen. And he was right. And I learned in going through and getting my signatures that I better plan some time here. Every person has something to add and contribute. Don't be surprised if you see me walking through town, knocking on people's doors to get their information and to let them know that I'm running. I think what you heard tonight, hopefully some of the things that I said resonate with you. We're looking for trust of the government officials and how the business operates for the public, in public. That we're looking for accountability on the board members, as well as the people that we have oversight of. Yes, I have certification in auditing and governance. That should be a good thing to have on a select board with a town with an $11 million budget. I enjoyed every bit with the different people who I met with. Many of them, sure, are in this room, and you came with different ideas and different perspectives. Yes, I have an open mind. You need to. You need to have some creativity and thought. There's a lot of people in this town with higher degrees and certifications and more interesting experiences than I have. They should be welcomed. And the select board should be available. We should treat the people as guests when they come to the meeting. We're the host. We're facilitating a meeting. We need to show the people the hospitality that you would want to show a guest. It doesn't matter if they happen to spill wine on the carpet. Don't make a big deal of it. Let's welcome them. Give the people the voice. Make sure that they feel comfortable and that the democracy that we do have in our town is working for them. Do I have a particular agenda in this? The real answer is no, I don't. Except for rebuild the trust. You can't really have a good functioning community without that. Make sure people are communicating, even and more especially if they have different ideas. Because out of that might come something very interesting and very good for the town. Yes, I'm looking for the long-term town benefit, and I hope that you choose to vote for me. Thank you.
Okay, and then next goes to Ray.
Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to our ideas and to share your concerns and issues. As you can see, we have 5 candidates for 2 seats on the select board. We have different ideas, different solutions, different approaches to getting things done. But I believe we all want what's best for this special place that we call home. And I can't speak for the other candidates, but I will promise you this: no matter what the outcome, I will continue to dedicate myself to serving the town of Camden and you, the citizens. Thank you for this evening.
There's one thing that I didn't get to speak about that I feel very strongly about. There's a tsunami happening in our town with the percentage who are aging and the fact that we have nobody that's going to care for them. In 2022, the stats, there were 132 deaths in Camden and 18 births. We have an aging population and there's 0 human service people to assist folks as they age. This is a huge problem. There's no one going, Rotary gives out scholarships, and for the first time in forever today, the gentleman who hands them out said, there were 40 applications and not one person applied to nursing school. It has never happened in his experience, and he's been doing it for years. There is a problem, and this is a huge deal, and how are we going to age in place? How are we going to stay in this town that we love? How can we sustain some independence in our homes, which is something that wants? I've done research on that, and this whole thing about a neighbor-to-neighbor program. Our biggest resource is our human capital and how caring people in Camden really are. I've seen when there's been a crisis how people extend themselves. We're going to really need that, and we're going to have to come up with a plan that this is going to have to be a systemic solution to help folks age in place, because it is going to be huge. No one's talking about it because I'm a social worker. I'm very aware. All these places that I call, they'll say, Mary Beth, we don't have anyone. We used to have staff. We have no one. So it's a huge deal, and I hope that we can come up with a solution, but it's gonna take our resources and people really deciding that neighbors are gonna help neighbors for this to work. And I hope that you consider that I do research and try to come up with new ideas. I try to really come up with solutions. My whole work as a director has always been to have a problem and have a solution. So I would appreciate your vote in the coming election. Thanks.
Okay, and then Alex.
Yeah.
I do a lot better answering questions by writing and thinking about things ahead of time. I think sometimes with these types of forums, it's easy to go off the cuff and say something emotional, and so I am really looking forward to answering all the Penn Bay pilot questions, because it's a chance to do it a little bit more thoughtfully. And anybody that wants more insight into anything that I'm thinking or wants a more complete answer, feel free to write me, and I'm happy to do that. I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to run again. I've been doing this for 2 terms now, so 6 years. I have kids that occasionally I feel bad in this part of a track meet today. And I asked them, like, should I do this again or should I not? And they were surprised. They were really encouraging about it, which was funny because a lot of the times they're not encouraging about it, like in the grocery store or down at the harbor. They hear, really anywhere I go, I hear somebody's opinion about something. And I think the reason that I still want to do it is because I really still like that. It doesn't make me feel, I think I'll want to stop once that makes me feel grumpy, but it doesn't yet. I'm sure I'll get to a point where it will, but I still really get so many people bring me stuff, mostly people that can't show up at a meeting. They're not going to almost never show up at a meeting, and sometimes people tell me that. Like, I'm never going to come to a select board meeting and say all this, and sometimes it's the most eloquent, knowledgeable people who are just never going to come to a meeting and loudly proclaim their opinion. They're going to express it quietly, and I really enjoy that part of it, like being a voice when possible for people that have really good ideas that aren't, interested in participating in this kind of like adversarial system. So I hope that as new members come onto the board, it might be an opportunity to look at like better means of public engagement, ways to get people's opinion through surveys and going out to the schools, or different things like that isn't so meeting centric, because it really is kind of an unpleasant thing for a lot of people. So thank you so much for doing this tonight, and I'm kind of encouraged about trying to do better. So.
And Mark.
I guess we get to, Allison sat down, so I guess I get to sit down. First off, I wish there were 5,000 people in this room. I wish every person in Camden was here, because I think voting when you don't know the people, voting when you don't know the initiatives and stuff is a major problem in this world these days, where people are making decisions without really learning about what they're making decisions about. So thank you for coming, because this is really important that the people here are here to listen to us and make a decision about what you like. I tried to make sure, and I will do it as we get closer to the election, that people know exactly where I stand and what I believe in. And one of the things I hope you get is that I actually research everything that I talk about. I just don't make a snap decision, an emotional decision about something. I research it, look at it, examine it, talk to people about it, because I think that's important. We have to be knowledgeable as well. We just can't have an agenda and come to the meeting and say, I want to do this, we need to listen to it. And the thing that's really important is I have one vote. Even if I'm on the select board, I have one vote on any issue in the town. It's the same as every vote in this room, and that's really important. I like the town meeting kind of management because the town gets to vote on every important issue, and I think that's really important. The select board, Allison mentioned, the select board actually has very little control over a lot of issues, and never forget that you have the vote, and however you vote is the right way, and just do your research. And the other thing I'd like to say is thank everybody on the panel here tonight, because it's daunting to do this job, to get up and do this, and come to these meetings and talk about this, and put yourself out there. It's a hard thing to do, so thank you to everybody. However,
Thank Dan.
We're gonna thank you.
okay, yeah, we'll get, good.
Sorry, never thank the press.
And thanks to Dan for saying that. We haven't had a public forum like this in 3 or 4 years, so I appreciate Dan setting it up. There hasn't been one for, I think, 3 or 4 years during the previous election, so I think it's important that you did this. Thank you for that.